Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly remarkable piece of literature that has sparked everything from intense academic debate to a critically acclaimed 2025 indie film. We are, of course, talking about Denis Johnson's Pulitzer-nominated novella, Train Dreams. It is a masterpiece of quiet proportions, and we've got an ambitious plan for this one. We're going to explore this story through three distinct lenses. We'll use a micro lens to focus on one man's heart, a macro lens to examine the history and myths of the American West, and a medium lens to show you exactly how you adapt a seemingly unfilmable book for the silver screen. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the life of Robert Granier, unsettle the traditional frontier myth, and examine the infrastructures of an empire. Then we'll dive into adapting this internal world, look at the production magic behind the 2025 film, and finally reconcile the American dream.
All right, part one, the life of Robert Granier through the emotional lens.
To really understand the academic and cinematic takes we'll get into later, you first have to feel the weight of Robert Granier's 80-year journey. He arrives in Idaho in the early 1900s as an orphan riding the Great Northern Railway. Moving into the 1910s, he actually finds his anchor. He marries Gladys, they build a cabin together, and have a baby girl, Kate. But then tragedy strikes. In the 1920s, while Granier is away logging, this massive, devastating wildfire sweeps through the valley. It destroys his cabin and completely takes his family. From there on out, the rest of his life is basically an exercise in enduring. He becomes a bit of a relic of a bygone era, living alone out in the woods, eventually watching John Glenn go to space on a television set in 1962. He passes away peacefully in his cabin in 1968, right after taking a flight in a biplane. So you have this life defined by immense personal loss, all set against a backdrop of just mind-boggling technological change.
Moving on to part two, unsettling the frontier myth, looking through the academic lens.
According to a really fascinating 2023 academic study published in IRE journals, Johnson's novella possesses this incredible, almost surreal quality. They call it a waking dream. And the academics argue that this dreamlike haze purposely disturbs the smooth, progressive narrative we usually associate with the American frontier. Instead of your standard, straightforward story of triumph and civilization pushing westward, Train Dreams offers up a disjointed, haunting reality. It's full of environmental crisis and heavy memories that disrupt traditional American self-confidence.
Part three, infrastructures of an empire and replotting the West.
So, to fully grasp this academic critique, we have to understand a concept called narrative infrastructure. The researchers use this term from scholar Levin Emil. Basically, the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't just wood and steel. It was the physical foundation upon which the entire American dream was plotted across the landscape. The rails brought commerce and settlers, sure, but they also brought property regimes and statehood. Train Dreams is celebrated by these academics specifically because it takes these solid infrastructural lines and completely unsettles the stories we've built around them.
The researchers lay out a pretty stark contrast between two ways of viewing U.S. expansion. On one hand, you have the traditional frontier myth, the familiar stories of progress, expansion, and the brave pursuit of profit and power. On the other hand, the researchers present the academic framework of settler imperialism. Through this lens, those exact same historical events are viewed as spatial reterritorialization, the enforcement of colonial property regimes, and the harsh realities of racial exclusion and elimination. The paper argues that Johnson's novella forces us to look at both of these perspectives simultaneously, which creates a deeply political and unsettling reading experience.
All right, part four, adapting an internal world through the director's lens. Think about this for a second. How do you take a book that is this deeply internal, this quiet, and this heavily symbolic, and turn it into a compelling movie? Well, star Joel Edgerton, who plays Robert Granier, explained the film's main solution to the character's silence. Granier is clearly not a guy who sits around talking about his trauma. So the filmmakers used a voiceover to preserve Denis Johnson's internal poetry. And not just any voice. They used actor Will Patton, who actually narrated the audiobook of the novella. It's a brilliant cinematic trick. Because, as Edgerton points out, Granier has, quote, 18 feelings running within him. And that voiceover allows us to experience his rich inner life without breaking the authentic, rugged silence of the man himself.
Part 5, the poetry of quietness and some real production magic.
The behind-the-scenes details here are absolutely astounding. Cinematographer Adolfo Veloso had to capture this sweeping 80-year epic in just 29 days up in Washington state. To keep everything feeling raw and authentic, he shot on the ARRI Alexa 35 cinema camera, using strictly natural light.
And when they had to film in locations that had strict no open flame rules, he built a customized candle rig to perfectly mimic firelight. But my absolute favorite detail, for a movie literally about a lumberjack, they didn't want to harm the real environment, so they used fiberglass tree props and visual effects for the logging scenes instead of felling real ancient trees. That self-imposed environmental constraint connects so perfectly to this quote from actor William H. Macy, who plays an explosives expert in the film. He noted that there is just something inherently sacred about these ancient forests. The entire cast and crew clearly had a deep respect for the complex relationship between humans and nature that Johnson wrote about. It really proves that you can make a sweeping historical epic about man conquering nature without actually having to conquer nature to film it.
Finally, Part 6. Reconciling the American Dream and Connecting it all together. As we pull the micro, macro, and medium lenses together, Joel Edgerton perfectly summarized what this story is really about. At its core, way beneath the transcontinental railroads and the frontier mythologies, this is a story about ordinary people just trying to maintain their humanity. Robert Grenier had to leave his family for months on end to go log forests just to put food on the table, and it ultimately cost him everything. It's about that universal tension between the brutal, practical demands of existence, that economic engine, and the deep emotional needs of the human heart. And honestly, that's a tension that hasn't gone anywhere since the 1900s. We all deal with it today in one form or another. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you navigate your own modern version of the American dream. How do you reconcile your own economic survival with your deepest emotional connections? Take a moment, think about it, and maybe check out Train Dreams to see how one man tried to find his answer. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.